Then the phantom of a huge hairless dog pursues the real dogs, which expire in convulsions and cramps at sight of him. All the countless spirits of evil are abroad striving to bring sickness and death, foul weather and failure in hunting, on the Eskimos. Most dreaded of all these spectral visitants are Sedna, mistress of the netherworld, and her father, to whose share dead Eskimos fall. While the other spirits fill the air and water, she rises from underground. It is then a busy season for the wizards. In every house you may hear them singing and praying, while they conjure the spirits, seated in a mystic gloom at the back of the hut, which is dimly lit by a lamp burning low. The hardest task of all is to drive away Sedna, and this is reserved for the most powerful enchanter. A rope is coiled on the floor of a large hut, in such a way as to leave a small opening at the top, which represents the breathing hole of a seal. Two enchanters stand beside it, one of them grasping a spear as if he were watching a seal hole in winter, the other holding the harpoon line. A third sorcerer sits at the back of the hut, chanting a magic song to lure Sedna to the spot. Now she is heard approaching under the floor of the hut, breathing heavily. Now she emerges at the hole. Now she is harpooned and sinks away in angry haste, dragging the harpoon with her, while the two men hold on to the line with all their might. The struggle is severe, but at last, by a desperate wrench, she tears herself away and returns to her dwelling in Adilivoon. When the harpoon is drawn up of the hole, it is found to be splashed with blood, which the enchanters proudly exhibit as a proof of their prowess. Thus Sedna and the other evil spirits are at last driven away, and next day a great festival is celebrated by old and young in honor of the event. But they must still be cautious, for the wounded Sedna is furious, and will seize any one she may find outside of his hut. So they all wear amulets on the top of their hoods to protect themselves against her. These amulets consist of pieces of the first garments that they wore after birth. The Iroquois inaugurated their new year in January, February, or March, the time varied, with a festival of dreams, like that which the Hurons observed on special occasions. The whole ceremonies lasted several days, or even weeks, and formed a kind of Saturnalia. Men and women, variously disguised, went from wigwam to wigwam, smashing and throwing down whatever they came across. It was a time of general license. The people were supposed to be out of their senses, and therefore not to be responsible for what they did. Accordingly, many seized the opportunity of paying off old scores by belabouring obnoxious persons, drenching them with ice-cold water, and covering them with filth or hot ashes. Others seized burning brands or coals and flung them at the heads of the first person they met. The only way of escaping from these persecutors was to guess what they had dreamed of. On one day of the festival, the ceremony of driving away the evil spirits from the village took place. Men clothed in the skins of wild beasts, their faces covered with hideous masks, and their hands with the shells of a tortoise, went from hut to hut making frightful noises. In every hut they took the fuel from the fire and scattered the embers and ashes about the floor with their hands. The general confession of sins which preceded the festival was probably a preparation for the public expulsion of evil influences. It was a way of stripping the people of their mortal burdens, that these might be collected and cast out. In September, the Incas of Peru celebrated a festival called Situa, the object of which was to banish from the capital and its vicinity all disease and trouble. The festival fell in September, because the rains begin about this time, and with the first rains there was generally much sickness. As a preparation for the festival, the people fasted on the first day of the moon after the autumnal equinox. Having fasted during the day, and the night being come, they baked a coarse paste of maize. This paste was made of two sorts. One was kneaded with the blood of children aged from 5 to 10 years, the blood being obtained by bleeding the children between the eyebrows. These two kinds of paste were baked separately, because they were for different uses. Each family assembled at the house of the eldest brother to celebrate the feast, and those who had no elder brother went to the house of their next relation of greater age. On the same night, all who had fasted during the day washed their bodies, and taking a little of the blood-kneaded paste, rubbed it over their head, face, breast, shoulders, arms, and legs. They did this in order that the paste might take away all their infirmities. After this, the head of the family anointed the threshold with the same paste, and left it there as a token that the inmates of the house had performed their ablutions and cleansed their bodies. Meantime, the high priest performed the same ceremonies in the temple of the sun. As soon as the sun rose, all the people worshipped and besought him to drive all evils out of the city, and then they broke the fast with the paste that had been kneaded without blood. When they had paid their worship and broken their fast, which they did at the stated hour, in order that all might adore the sun as one man, an Inca of the blood royal came forth from the fortress as a messenger of the sun, richly dressed, with his mantle girded round his body, and a lance in his hand. The lance was decked with feathers of many hues, extending from the blade to the socket, and fastened with rings of gold. He ran down the hill from the fortress, brandishing his lance, till he reached the centre of the great square, where stood the golden urn, like a fountain, that was used for the sacrifice of the fermented juice of the maize. Here 4 other Incas of the blood royal awaited him, each with a lance in his hand, and his mantle girded up to run. The messenger touched the 4 lances with his lance, and told them that the sun bade them, as his messengers, drive the evils out of the city. The 4 Incas then separated, and ran down the 4 royal roads which led out of the city to the 4 quarters of the world. While they ran, all the people, great and small, came to the doors of their houses, and with great shouts of joy and gladness shook their clothes, as if they were shaking off dust, while they cried, "Let the evils be gone! How greatly desired has this festival been by us! O Creator of all things, permit us to reach another year, that we may see another feast like this." After they had shaken their clothes, they passed their hands over their heads, faces, arms, and legs, as if in the act of washing. All this was done to drive the evils out of their houses, that the messengers of the sun might banish them from the city, and it was done not only in the streets through which the Incas ran, but generally in all quarters of the city. Moreover, they all danced, the Inca himself amongst them, and bathed in the rivers and fountains, saying that their maladies would come out of them. Then they took great torches of straw, bound around with cords. These they lighted, and passed from one to the other, striking each other with them, and saying, "Let all harm go away." Meanwhile, the runners ran with their lances for a quarter of a league outside the city, where they found 4 other Incas ready, who received the lances from their hands, and ran with them. Thus the lances were carried by relays of runners for a distance of 5 or 6 leagues, at the end of which the runners washed themselves and their weapons in a river, and set up the lances in sign of a boundary within which the banished evils might not return. The negroes of Guinea annually banished the devil from all their towns with much ceremony at a time set apart for the purpose. At Axim on the Gold Coast, this annual expulsion is preceded by a feast of 8 days, during which mirth and jollity, skipping, dancing, and singing prevail, and a perfect lampooning liberty is allowed, and scandal so highly exalted, that they may freely sing of all the faults, villainies, and frauds of their superiors, as well as inferiors, without punishment, or so much as the least interruption. On the 8th day they hunt out the devil with a dismal cry, running after him and pelting him with sticks, stones, and whatever comes to hand. When they have driven him far enough out of the town, they all return. In this way he is expelled from more than 100 towns at the same time. To make sure that he does not return to their houses, the women wash and scour all their wooden and earthen vessels, to free them from all uncleanliness and the devil. At Cape Coast Castle, on the Gold Coast, the ceremony was witnessed on the night of October, 1844, by an Englishman, who has described it as follows. Tonight the annual custom of driving the evil spirit, Abunsam, out of the town has taken place. As soon as the 8 o'clock gun fired in the fort, the people began firing muskets in their houses, turning all their furniture out of doors, beating about in every corner of the room with sticks, etc., and screaming as loudly as possible, in order to frighten the devil. Being driven out of the houses, as they imagined, they sallied forth into the streets, throwing lighted torches about, shouting, screaming, beating sticks together, rattling old pans, making the most horrid noise, in order to drive him out of the town into the sea. The custom is preceded by 4 weeks' dead silence. No gun is allowed to be fired, no drum to be beaten, no palaver to be made between man and man. If, during these weeks, 2 natives should disagree and make a noise in the town, they are immediately taken before the king and fined heavily. If a dog or pig, sheep or goat be found at large in the street, it may be killed or taken by another, the the former owner not being allowed to demand any compensation.